When I first made my video about the Puppet Master, it spurred a surprising number of 1. Very interesting, but also 2. Very spicy takes regarding Hama, her almost mutually assured destruction mindset, and bloodbending in general. So today, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into all of those broader talking points, as well as some things that are sort of implied but never really talked about because, you know, this is still a Nickelodeon show. And actually, while I joke about it, keep in mind that everything we're going to be talking about today is like 10 minutes of a show, and well, you've seen the video length.
First things first though, I think when it comes to any kind of cultural or moral discussions, it's always important to begin with just laying out basic facts. Fundamentally, bloodbending is simply controlling some water that just so happens to be obstructed by a few layers of meat. But that's it. Just like metal bending is this higher form of earthbending, realizing the true properties of metal and focusing on those to extend earthbending itself, bloodbending zeroes in on some of those refreshing H2Os to cruise around in the aforementioned layers of meat.
Okay, that just sounds actually disgusting.
What I'm getting at is that from a purely practical point of view, bloodbending is a bending technique just like every other. It simply controls liquid and that is it. The fact that it's blood and that seems icky to us is a social/moral/ideological problem which we'll get to in due time. But outside of that, it has no intrinsic value beyond just being another tool. And with that in mind, I think a good introduction to these conversations is to apply that purely practical point of view to see just the upside.
Healing is probably the first thing that most of us will jump to, as I think it can be sort of seen as an extension of bloodbending. These will of course be purely hypothetical examples, as we don't see this neither in Avatar or in Korra, but I do think all of these things do fit the logic of bending.
A master bloodbender could instantly stop active bleeding and single-handedly enable, well, quite literally impossible surgeries. With total control over a person's blood flow, internal bleeding can be detected, stopped, and healed near instantly. They could control blood pressure, they could restart a heart near instantly, they could detect and fix blood clots. A master bloodbender could even potentially help people walk again through assistive physiotherapy. They could control autoimmune reactions and like a dozen other life-saving things. So again, from a purely practical point of view, it seems almost evil not to use those bending forms, right? Even today, we don't have anywhere near the medical capabilities that bloodbending could theoretically enable. So what kind of moral argument could ever make this not worth it?
Well, I think this brings me on to a truth that all of us know very well. It is all in the eye of the beholder. With great power comes great responsibility, and a dozen other versions of basically the same idea.
Think of the single worst weapon humanity has ever created. Many of you will have immediately went to nuclear weapons, but that same technology is currently providing a tenth of the global energy supply, and in the eyes of many, is the single fastest way to convert our power grids to sustainable energy. A brilliant series of videos on that by Kai Hill, by the way. But wouldn't you know it, just like bloodbending is this great taboo, for many people, nuclear power is something that shouldn't be touched with a 10-foot pole. There is of course the compounding variable that are past tragedies, but for a sizable portion of the population, the sheer idea of nuclear power is scary and unpredictable enough that it simply shouldn't be pursued regardless of how safe and efficient it is. But moving closer to the question of our own bodies, consider genetic engineering. And we're purely talking about humans here, no plants or animals or whatever else, just people. Just like with nuclear power, there are perfectly legitimate questions of safety, but for many, there is also the human body shouldn't be altered perspective. On one hand, genetically perfect people could be created. No chance of dangerous mutations, no chance of inherited diseases, completely free of autoimmune conditions, nothing. Again, it's almost evil not to consider that kind of technology, right? I have an autoimmune condition, can confirm, not great. But at the same time, what would be the ramifications of creating quote-unquote perfect people? Isn't it like really weird to create what is effectively designed life, almost like it was a toy? Would everyone have access to such technology? And if not, well, let's not even talk about that kind of inequality, it'd be really bad. So again, with all of these things, as well as with bloodbending, when looked at from a purely conceptual point of view, they have so many different uses. From those potential medical applications to even completely harmless yet absolute restraining of potential attackers. So what gives? Sure, there are safety questions and long-term societal ramifications. But what about those almost primal disdains for technology like genetic engineering? Why does it seem, quote-unquote, wrong to so many people when they can't even precisely articulate why they feel that way?
And for that, I think we need to dive a little bit deeper into why blood magic, necromancy, curses, and all of those kinds of things are so prevalent in media as these dark, almost forbidden arts. The way I see it, most of these things are usually rooted in two primary fears: the fear of the unknown and the fear of things you can't control, with bodily autonomy being the most obvious example of that, but I think both of these things usually go hand in hand.
A fear of the unknown is just basic survival instinct. For millions of years we survived as a not at all strong species exactly because we were cautious rather than confrontational. Instead of wandering around in a dark night and getting jumped by an animal that we couldn't even see and didn't even know it was capable of, we used fire to light up the dark. Soon we established settlements which further reduced that uncertainty of constantly traveling around, etc. This stuff is just hard encoded into our DNA because that is how our species survived. No amount of interwebs and dank memes can take away millions of years of evolution. And so, that fundamental theme also manifests in our own fictional stories. Why is a battle of light and darkness just about the most common trope in fantasy? Well, the reason why it's light versus dark is because the dark meant getting jumped by a bear.
Hello, children.
Or a creepy lady, I guess. I mean, even the phrase of dark magic is rooted in that primal fear of the dark because wandering in the dark is how you got killed. Fire meant light, warmth, and safety. Most belief systems are also founded on the idea that they create safety, order, and certainty. Things like the afterlife and grander plans we don't understand is simply a human way of coping with that existential uncertainty. Ditto for cosmic horror. The thing that I, as well as many others, love about it is that it by design is incomprehensible, and that's exactly what makes it scary. So all of that, I think, covers the reactionary sense of just wrongness we feel towards something like bloodbending. Big boulders, we understand. Roaring fires, we understand. But what we don't understand is the ability to control someone else like a puppet. And so that immediately creates this primal fear of the idea of bloodbending itself, which also directly connects to that question of bodily autonomy. One example that tends to get lumped in with all of these dark arts, blood magic, and so on is necromancy, which I think is just about the clearest example of what I mean. Just like bloodbending could theoretically bring healing abilities, surely bringing people back from the dead should be a universally positive thing, right? So why is it that necromancy is almost always used as not just a taboo, but a thing that is explicitly used for evil? Be it just apocalyptic zombie fiction, or the Lich King, or the Mummy, or Gecko Moria, even characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. All of these are villainous characters framed as puppeteering and disrespecting the dead for their own selfish goals. Depending on the story, their exact characterization and morals will of course differ. But in a vast majority of stories, they will always be vengeful and destructive. They will be manifestations of the wrongdoing they saw in their lifetimes, and so they rise again and effectively take revenge. And again, I think this too loops right back to basic human principles. Death is fundamental to life, and it's that denial of basic natural principles that makes the entire subject have this super eerie sense to it. It's unironically like subverting expectations, only with like basic laws of nature. Just like with fearing the unknown, yet again, no amount of dank memes can change our monkey brains from thinking that death is meant to be final. That's why most stories usually explore the angle of the person that is being brought back not being the same. The death part, we know very well. It's what comes afterwards that brings up a whole lot of questions of, are they truly the same? Are they truly acting of their own free will? And so on. And this of course extends to countless other cultural and societal discussions around body autonomy. Should someone's right to make their own decisions ever be taken away if that means quote-unquote protecting them, or should everyone be able to make their own decisions regardless of what it is? Well, that's a debate for smarter people than me, but I think you see what I'm getting at. These things appear in our fictionalized stories because those are the things that we constantly think about. Those are those real-life stories. They're dressed up, sure, but fundamentally is the same thing. And one last example that I think very neatly encompasses all of that is the question of, do people have free will? Many belief systems are founded on the notion that humanity is just a piece of a grander puzzle. But why is it that when someone proposes the idea that free will might not exist, they immediately get backlash? Well, because that grander plan doesn't necessarily imply that one's autonomy is taken away. Claiming people don't have free will, on the other hand, again, goes directly against what we are hard-coded to think. If our autonomy is in some way impeded, our monkey brains respond with fear. How could it be that we can't change anything? Does that mean I won't be able to fight back against that big bear? Just like cosmic horror, it's that mixture of something fundamentally incomprehensible mixed with a total loss of control that is just instantly spooky. So after all of those swings and roundabouts,
There is no yapping in Ba Sing Se.
Coming back to bloodbending, I think the reason why it's easier for us to look at it and first see all the practical good things is because there is still a layer of detachment between the viewers and the in-universe logic of the series. Depending on your worldview, genetic engineering might be a universal W, nuclear power might be a universal W, and bloodbending might also be a universal W. But to some people, all of these things will always be scary because they embody very primal fears of the unknown, of uncertainty, and of a lack of control.
Like, for example, did you know that there exists a genetic link between people who fear heights and those same people having really bad sense of balance? Because their brains just automatically know that their own lack of balance will probably mean death, and therefore they fear heights. Like I said, no amount of cat memes can change our monkey brains.
Which brings us onto Hama specifically, and yes, we'll leave him on for a different video because those moral quandaries are quite a bit different. Just like with bloodbending itself, there are quite a few people who believe Hama's actions were justified and that our core cast are actually the naive ones ignoring the reality of war. So let's dig into that. Undoubtedly, she is a victim of so many horrible things, and of course, we can sympathize with her. She never should have gone through the things she did. She never wanted any of this. This war was started by Sozin and the Fire Nation, not her. She was a national hero holding out against the Fire Nation quite literally until the last man. But she is also an immoral, vengeful, and plainly evil person. And before we get any further, this is where we need to talk about something that I think dominates a lot of these conversations, especially when it comes to fiction. Moral hypocrisy, self-referential ethics, egocentric ethics, call it whatever. But the idea of supporting something if you benefit from it, but being against it in principle, and vice versa. For a basic example, let's say you believe yoinking things from rich people is morally justified. But when your stuff is stolen, you immediately demand justice. Those ethics are decided purely in self-interest, because in both situations, things were stolen. But the judgment is different. You can do mental gymnastics and say, oh, but they have so much already, but it's just that, mental gymnastics. If from an ethical point of view, you think that you shouldn't get your things stolen, and you think stealing is bad, then stealing is bad, period. There has been a ton of research done about this, which I'll link in the description. But point is, generally speaking, people are quite bad in being morally consistent if they are to benefit at someone else's loss, and vice versa. Humans are pack animals and inherently social creatures, sure, but it is still extremely likely that someone will put personal gain ahead of someone else's well-being. And with fiction specifically, where our perspective is often extremely limited, I think a lot of people tend to get very lost in the sauce, even if, as is in the case of Attack on Titan for example, the entire story is about describing that pitfall. No spoilers though, if you know, you know. Hama isn't some vigilante single-handedly disabling Fire Nation outposts. She isn't creating guerrilla groups within the Fire Nation to sow resistance. She isn't even spying or trying to gather intel. What she is doing, though, is collecting people like some messed up action figurines. And here's the funny part, you know what we call that in the real world? A literal crime. With her bending skills and deception abilities, I genuinely believe that there exists a world where she infiltrates the royal palace and just ices Ozai. I think that's exactly why we see so many parallels to Katara. Both are from the southern tribe. Both are excellent benders, drawing on the other nation's forms to inspire their own bending. Both have lost the people closest to them in this war, and so on. But it's in showing you how similar their origins are that we actually see just how drastically different they are now. She is a victim of this war, that much is true, but so is Katara, so is Sokka, so is Aang, and so are so many others. But you don't see the gang running around and putting up Ba Sing Se-like walls around every single Fire Nation settlement, now do you? Even when pursuing the Southern Raiders and using bloodbending in this cold and vengeful way, when Katara actually came face to face with her mother's killer, she rejected that insidious corruption that is vengeance. She never forgives him, she never accepts his apologies, she still believes that he is a waste of space, but she still just leaves him. Yeah, she spares him, but even more so, I think it is Katara sparing herself. Because where does this vengeance lead? Okay, she'll kill this dude, will she kill the rest of their squad? Will she kill the higher-up general who gave the order? Will she kill Ozai himself? Where does this end?
If you want to see a story about this kind of just vengeful pursuit, I'd really recommend watching Vinland Saga. I'm not going to spoil anything because I genuinely think that it is a beautiful story that just about everyone needs to watch, but it also very clearly deals with this kind of generational hatred and to what ends some people will go.
I think the main reason why some people tend to get lost in the sauce when it comes to characters like Hama, and another gentleman I often talk about right here on the channel, is again because of self-referential morality. What I mean by that is that we see what Hama has gone through, and importantly, our perspective of her is also anchored on those first impressions. And because she is clearly a tragedy as well, our monkey brain side of us immediately jumps to, oh yeah, if I was her, I'd also fight literally everyone. They deserve it, they attacked me. But you know, there's an obvious flaw in that statement. Because what if you were one of the random civilians in this town? What if that was your mother, your sister, your brother, your father? You obviously didn't start this war, you didn't go to the front lines to fight, you might not even support what is happening. But you are still, quote-unquote, the enemy just because you live on their land? I mean, most of these people don't even seem to be benders, so again, I don't think this is some self-sacrificial heroic pursuit of justice. This is purely desire for power and dominance, just like the firebenders exercised over her. Bloodbending is the purest form to showcase that, because that dominance is insidious. It is absolute, it is fundamentally against the other's desires. Yet she does it anyway. She knows what that entrapment feels like. She was that innocent person who suddenly got her freedom and life taken away. But instead of trying to do anything about it, she repeats the same exact thing with innocent civilians in this random village. It's perfectly fine to understand how she got to this point, but anything beyond that? Yeah, no.
She's crazy and she needs to go down.
So, with all that being said, I want to circle back to that point of bloodbending and all of those kinds of things feeling immediately taboo and ask the question of, could something like that ever be justified?
And well, as with all societal questions, I think the true answer will totally depend on the time, the place, and a dozen other variables that have very little to do with bloodbending itself. But, just as a quick thought exercise, I still want to entertain at least a few scenarios. I think the first and most obvious one is one that I already mentioned earlier. Forcing someone to bend the knee without violence. Think Dai Li swooping it with their rock hands and locking everyone up, only like 10 times more OP. Naturally, this poses the question of whether or not anyone who you've forced to kneel will ever truly kneel. It's again that generational and inherited conflict. But at the same time, through this absolute power, you can just disable all resistance and you can stop bloodshed.
Get it? Stop blood. Okay, no, let's just stop this. Bloodshed, bloodbending, yes, I know, it's very funny.
Based on what we see in the series, the only people who could realistically resist bloodbending is A, a fully realized avatar, and B, other master waterbenders that have too been juiced up by the moon. And that's kinda it. Unlike other fictional stories where there is some sort of extra, like, intangible force to counter these kinds of absolute powers, bloodbending has no counter. Once you become a puppet of a bloodbender, that's kinda it. It's sorta binary. But at the same time, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Let's entertain the idea that Ozai is brought down by bloodbending and the war is stopped through that. Great, big W's all around, we've defeated Ozai and we haven't even harmed him. But that also becomes this sort of metaphorical icebreaker. The next time we face an incredibly powerful foe, why not subdue them immediately? It would avoid bloodshed, right? And so, we've already moved the goalposts. Next time, just a regular dude pops up, and again, why not use bloodbending? Even if you mean well, you wouldn't want to burn them or anything, right? So, you just restrain him. And before you know it, as soon as any resistance whatsoever appears, some of which might actually be good resistance fighting for like better rights or something like that, you instantly whip out bloodbending because hey, it is an instant solution. The way I pose this dilemma is of course assuming that we have someone like Amon who can bloodbend like 24/7, and the slippery slope I propose is also very much simplified. But I think the idea definitely still stands. Even in the hands of someone with extremely pure intentions, bloodbending is just unironically too good not to be used as a weapon. But okay, let's take a sidestep of sorts and talk about disarmament. Aang taking away Ozai's bending, that's just like an avatar and spirit magic thing, right? Well, Amon blocking bending is bloodbending, but functionally, we can kinda sorta treat those as the same thing, right? And so, the question arises, if we don't regularly use it as a weapon, should we use it to just take away people's bending? If it worked for Ozai, why not do it for Azula? Why not do it for Long Feng? Why not do it for every single corrupt Dai Li soldier?
Maybe ripping out a core parts of what makes a person them isn't a good idea. Maybe it's just cruel and... wait, wouldn't they all just band together and fight back, even without bending, just to get their bending back? Yeah, not a good idea.
Normalizing the use of bloodbending is just opening Pandora's box because it is fundamentally different from every other bending art. The reason why it seems wrong is because there is no defending against it. We are predators, that is why our eyes point forward, we know how to fight back. But when that ability is ripped away, when you can't even control your own body anymore, that's when things get really scary, because basic laws of nature have just been destroyed. Because this is still an Avatar video, let's not talk about like history and politics. But fighting back when things get really bad is just about the only thing that has kept parts of society afloat. Like we see throughout Avatar itself, be it water, earth, or fire, even non-benders can fight back. They may lose and get seriously hurt in the process, but they will never lose the ability to stand up for what they believe in until the last breath.
Bloodbending fundamentally rips that away until there is nothing left. Think of the censorship we saw in Ba Sing Se. Now make it absolute in its power to control entire populations. Imagine an attack that is immediately preceded by bloodbenders coming in and taking away every defeated soldier's bending. Imagine an attack that just sends in a tiny group of bloodbenders and dismantling entire nations so fast that Azula's personal best would look like a first-time playthrough. I know all of these seem like these far-off ideas that we never actually see in the series, but are they really that far off? We saw what happens when just a single father teaches this kind of thing to his two sons. It's a very small sample pool, I know, but imagine that on the scale of the Dai Li, doing everything in their power to research bloodbending.
Hama's philosophy, not just about bloodbending, but power in general, was effectively mutually assured destruction 24/7. She tells Katara that if this power exists, she must be the one to use it before someone else does. And the thing is, she is right. Katara bloodbending basically proves her point immediately. The only thing that can take down a bloodbender is that mutually assured destruction mindset. Problem is, again, there is no bloodbending counter besides bloodbending itself or the Avatar. So that Pandora's box I just mentioned becomes every nation trying to get as many bloodbenders as possible, and ideally, constantly trying to get rid of the enemy's bloodbenders as well. These aren't just standing armies of regular benders. These are single-person armies capable of controlling other people without ever so much as moving a muscle. So what happens when a random Kingsguard suddenly stabs their own king? What happens when an industrial site suddenly explodes because someone messed up on their duties? Can you ever blame those people if bloodbending is a thing? And let's take it a step further. What happens when underground markets are established for bloodbenders? Yeah, this whole loss of bending thing is reversible. But what if a bloodbender breaks into somewhere, restricts everyone's movements, while a group of raiders just yoinks anything they can with no resistance whatsoever?
Bloodbending has no morality. It doesn't choose whether it's going to be good or evil. It's just a tool, but it is a tool that would bring out the absolute worst in people. Benders versus benders already abide by a sort of a mutually assured destruction mindset, so on average, no conflict should happen. Bloodbending, on the other hand, allows for those kinds of evil, vicious acts with no risk, no resistance whatsoever. The thing that makes bloodbending so horrifying is that you never know what the other person is thinking. You don't know what they want, you don't know what they're capable of, but you can never even be guarded because your body is just not your own. For the rest of your life, everything you see, everything you feel, everything you even think will always be tainted by that idea of, what if that wasn't me? I don't think there is a simple answer of whether or not keeping bloodbending hidden was the right call. Just about every new discovery comes with growing pains and some kind of unforeseen circumstances. Those healing applications could do so much good, but it is also this horribly insidious and uncontainable weapon. So what do you think about Katara's decision? Ultimately, we of course know that it leaked, so obviously those containment efforts didn't really work that well. So the natural question that arises is, should more effort have been put into containing it, or maybe getting ahead of that fallout, or maybe even researching it even further? Maybe even like a bloodbending task force should be formed, and maybe bloodbending schools should be opened up immediately to take advantage of those healing properties. Let me know what you think, because this is something that I think definitely needs to be explored in further Avatar media. We've already seen some very spicy things in the Kyoshi and Yang Chen novels, so maybe there exists bloodbenders before Hama. Maybe there's like a secret tribe of them, but that technique was lost to time. I don't know, it would be very interesting. But whatever the case, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing all of your takes on bloodbending, and maybe how these kinds of taboo arts should be handled in general.
And that's the video. First full video I've recorded with the additional camera setup, so I'm still experimenting a whole bunch with the equipment, but it's definitely a fun little additional challenge that I look forward to incorporating in future videos. And on that note, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to experiment with such things. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest members of the team, Amata, or Emeda, I think, Jigs Buckman, Aragon0101 the Dragon Rider, Rogue Ninja 16255, Fatomatsa Falil Dombuya, I'm so sorry if I butchered the name I did, Bushi Umut, I think, and Richmond Cena. I butchered all of those names, but without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Also, completely unrelated, but you have no idea how excited I am for the upcoming Roku novel. The stuff we saw briefly in the live-action series makes me believe that maybe there's going to be a whole lot more lore than we expect. I really hope so. I still really want a full-blown Sozin series about the start of the war. Now that we don't have all the age limitations and stuff that we had with Nickelodeon, I think exploring the politics of how all that went down would be so interesting. And maybe we can even touch on Hama's story, Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!